Hello there! Today we'll be sculpting this Hercules beetle in polymer clay, because let's face it, beetles are pretty cool. If you want to create your own Hercules beetle, you can print out the lesson PDF available in the link above. I've printed out the diagrams to an A3 size and cut out the footing template so I can tape it to my base. We can then start to drill the holes in our base. It's really important to angle the holes as this is going to hold our armature in. The base I'm using today is mango wood, and it's the bottom of a cloche that I bought from a homeware store. You might just want to use a board, but I love how the cloche is going to turn our sculpture into a decor piece. Once the holes are done, remove the template and you can refer to the armature guide. Take a wire coat hanger, bend it straight and start on the beetle's back legs. To make our sharp bends, I'm using flat nose pliers and make small adjustments until the shape is right and it aligns with the guide. Once the shape is right, cut it to size. Remember to allow a little bit extra length to fit into the holes on the base. Once the first set of legs are done, fit them to the base and follow the same steps to create the next step, and finally the front legs. Remove the front set of legs and bind them with tie wire. This tie wire is so fine you can tie knots in it, which can be really handy when creating armatures. Bind the other two sets of legs together. Check them against your armature guide to make sure the tops of the legs are spaced apart correctly. Once the three legs are bound together, wrap wire around them and tie it off tightly. For our side profile, use another length of coat hanger wire and fashion the shape so it sits over the guide and matches as closely as possible. It's important that these are pretty accurate, as we'll be using it to set the position of the beetle's horns. Temporarily attach the piece you've created to the legs with some adhesive tape. We're doing this to make sure our beetle fits inside the glass top of the cloche. Then bind it tightly into position with tie wire. The stronger your armature structure is, the more hassle-free your sculpting will be, so it's definitely worth spending the time on it. I actually enjoy this stage. The beetle's form is taking shape and I can think about the modelling phase. Next, take some aluminium foil and beat it into shape so it fills out the beetle's body. Once you're happy with it, bind it tightly with adhesive tape. Aluminium is a really great padding material because it's so light, and it can also be packed together into very dense pieces. Make sure that your alfoil sits well inside the views, as that's the space where the clay will be. Sit your alfoil in the armature and bind it on with some tie wire. Run the tie wire around the horn coat hanger wire, as we'll want the clay to key onto that and not slide. It's not totally necessary, but will give some extra security. Then wrap wire around the legs. Although the clay has a better surface to key onto here, when you wrap it, it does limit how big you can make your legs, and for them to look scale. If you're wanting to create a smaller sculpture, you can leave out this wire wrapping stage. For the sculpting, we're going to use Montmartre steel modelling tools, wood mini modelling tools and beige polymer clay. Start by conditioning some clay through a clay press until your clay is malleable and workable and slightly sticky. Then begin to pack the clay into the underside of the beetle on the belly. Really push the clay into the voids so there are no pockets of air trapped in the clay that could leave holes later. Build up the belly and smooth it off with a flat modelling tool. At this stage, I realised I had forgotten to put in the wire support for the antennae. There's actually a lot of detail around the head which will need some pretty fine sculpting. Continue to build up the underside until the shape looks right and then smooth it off. Beetles have 6 legs that begin from a central line under the belly or abdomen, so I've created 6 tubes and take each one out to the leg part of the armature. Lay another piece of clay over the top of the leg and blend it into the clay from the underside. Once you have all 6 of the first leg portions done, cut the ends so that they're flat and smooth them off with a stiff bristled brush. On the underside of the beetle, the thorax is broken into segments called abdominal sternites. We're going to simply suggest these by laying sheets of clay on top of each other so they are stepped. Apply these to the underside of the thorax and wrap them up around the body. Then redefine the edges with a spike tool and use lots of small strokes to suggest the fine hairs over the beetle's exoskeleton. Work some clay through the clay press on setting 6. Cut it roughly to shape and apply it over the top of the beetle. Smooth the edges onto the side of the beetle. Roughly shape a slab of clay and lay it over the head part of the armature. Press the clay tightly against the armature. Again, you want to make sure there are no pockets of air that can cause baking problems later. Cut this clay back so your layer is roughly a few millimeters thick. One thing that's important to know is not to leave too much clay on here, or you won't be able to remove it if you need to later on in the refining stages. A really great technique I've discovered to level out clay is to roll the handle of a paintbrush over the surface. It works well and it's easy to do. Okay, well, the first layer is on and it's time for our first baking. Follow the instructions on the back of the packaging, but judging by the amount of clay on my beetle, it should take approximately 45 minutes. Once our beetle has had its initial oven baking and has cooled, we can start to build up the main surface. Pack on enough clay so that you can carve it back until you're happy with the shape. If you're going to give this project a go, it would be a good idea to research pictures of specific areas you'll be tackling, especially the head, as this carving stage is fairly intuitive. What we'll be removing is really going to be based on what your observation of your reference photos is and how you see the beetle. Spin your sculpture and continue to remove clay until the form looks right. Antennae on the face and the legs, pack clay around the armature and then carve it away until they look like they're the right thickness. Beetles have little nodes on their legs and you can easily apply these onto the sticky clay and smooth them on with the end of a brush. Now blend the feet onto the ends of the legs. I've simplified the legs on this sculpture. If you were going to put all of the wonderful details in that make up a beetle, you'd probably find it would be very time consuming and your finished sculpture might not necessarily end up looking any better. Sometimes simplifying it just enough to put in the essential elements is the trick. Create the wings by pressing a sheet of clay through the clay press on setting 4. Wrap this around the beetle and cut away the clay so that you can see the underside. Press the sheet on firmly to remove any air pockets and then remove the clay around the body with a hobby knife. You can create the join line between the two wings with a point tool. Push gently to create the desired depth. The beetle's hard casing that covers the wings is called the elytron. Remove some of the clay in the top of these and voila! Well, we hope you enjoyed this project and are inspired to create your very own beetle. You might want to create yours on a wall plaque, in a case, or even a giant terrarium. Stay tuned because we'll be painting our Hercules beetle in an upcoming lesson.